Trita Parsi, he's Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute think tank. He's also former President of the National Iranian-American Council and joins us via Skype from Washington, D.C. Trita, great to have you back. How significant is this warning from Israel against Iran, and how serious should we take these statements coming from Israel's top soldier?
Well, it reinforces what we already have seen, which is that even before Joe Biden took the oath of office, the Netanyahu government went at him extremely aggressively, took off the gloves right away to try to pressure Biden not to go back into the deal. And we actually have one of Netanyahu's ministers saying publicly that if the United States rejoins the nuclear deal, which is something that Biden believes lies in the U.S. national interest, Israel would go to war, essentially would start a war. So a threat of war in order to prevent Biden from going back into the deal. So this is very serious at a very early stage. In the past, we have seen tensions between the U.S. and Israel slowly and gradually escalate. At this time around, perhaps uniquely, it's starting right away, and Netanyahu has thrown the first punch.
Yeah, Trita, talk about the pressure. I mean, is Biden really likely to cave in to Israeli pressure just because the Israelis have threatened to attack Iran?
I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, rejoining the nuclear deal is so squarely in the U.S.'s national interest that I have a hard time seeing that Biden would cave to him. And this is why I think what the Netanyahu government is doing is ultimately really to the detriment of Israel's own security, because he is moving very aggressively towards damaging the relationship with the new president of the United States, which will have repercussions beyond just the Netanyahu-Biden relationship, will also affect Netanyahu's relationship with the Democratic Party. And I don't see them caving. I think one thing is really important, that from the Biden administration's perspective, a nuclear deal with Iran is critical in order to later on be able to have regional diplomacy on Syria, on Yemen, and on many of these other conflicts that need resolving.
And Trita, with 4 years of extremely tough sanctions under the Trump administration, is Iran now in a much weaker position, do you think, something that Israel is clearly taking advantage of?
Well, the Trump administration analysis was that the Iranians are in a much weaker position. I mean, at the end of the day, clearly because of their economy, which is really taken a huge hit by these sanctions, and COVID on top of it, the Iranians are, from that perspective, in a very bad situation. But at the same time, while all of these sanctions were being imposed on Iran, the Iranians did not back down an inch. The Trump administration gained nothing through all of this pressure. And frankly, at the same time, they have advanced their nuclear program because they have reduced some of their commitments to the agreement because of the U.S. walking out of it. So ultimately, part of the reason I think the Biden administration went for a compliance for compliance solution here is precisely because they knew that neither side is in a strong position. Both of them need to get back into the deal.
Trita, just a final thought to you. I mean, many Israeli politicians have recently warned the Biden administration not to appease Iran. So would the U.S. perhaps risk being dragged into a wider Middle East conflict if Israel were to attack?
Well, if Israel were to attack and if the Iranians were to retaliate, then there's a very significant likelihood that it would be a broader conflict. It would be very difficult for the United States to stay out of it as well. And that seems to be the leverage that the Israelis are trying to use right now against Biden. I don't think the Biden administration has any interest whatsoever in appeasing Iran. Going back into the nuclear deal would be because it's in the U.S.'s interest and it's enhancing American security by doing so. And again, I think ultimately it will be to the detriment of the Israelis themselves by picking a fight so early in the Biden presidency.
All right, Trita Parsi, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.